The moment my father dropped my BMW keys into another woman's hand, I knew I was no longer his daughter. I was just something he believed he could take from. 8 months pregnant, I slowly stood from my chair. My baby kicked so hard it took my breath away. The entire engagement party fell silent. My father smiled proudly at my older brother's fiancée, Vanessa. "Congratulations," he announced. "Think of this as your engagement gift." She squealed with excitement. Everyone clapped. Everyone except me. My name is Audrey Sullivan. I'm 30 years old, and 20 minutes after my father stole my car in front of my entire family, my husband walked through those doors, and the celebration never recovered. The BMW wasn't just any car. I'd bought it 4 years earlier after working double shifts for nearly 18 months. Every payment, every insurance bill, every service appointment. I paid for all of it. Not my father, not my brother. Me. Yet there they were, celebrating as if they'd won a prize. Vanessa hugged my father. "I love it." My brother, Daniel, wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Dad, you didn't have to." "I wanted to," Dad replied. Then he looked at me, almost daring me to object. I placed one hand beneath my swollen belly and slowly walked toward him. "Dad." He didn't even pretend not to know why I was there. "It's done." I held out my hand. "The keys." He shook his head. "No." I thought I'd misheard him. "What?" "I gave the car to Daniel and Vanessa." "You gave them my car." "It's family." I laughed once. A short, disbelieving laugh. "No." His smile disappeared. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean that's theft." Several relatives exchanged uncomfortable looks. Nobody spoke. My mother stared at the floor. Like always. Dad folded his arms. "Don't embarrass us." "I'm embarrassing you?" Vanessa awkwardly stepped backward, still holding my keys. Daniel finally spoke. "Audrey, stop making this about yourself." I looked at him, then at the BMW parked outside the banquet hall, then back at Dad. "My name is on the title." Dad smiled. "Not anymore." The room froze. My heart skipped. "What did you just say?" He looked directly into my eyes. "I already transferred it." For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then a sharp pain spread across my stomach. I grabbed the edge of the table. The baby kicked again. Harder. Daniel rolled his eyes. "See? She's just creating drama." I reached into my purse with trembling hands. Not for the car documents. For my phone. I called exactly one person. My husband. He answered on the first ring. I said only one sentence. "They stole my car." Then I hung up. Exactly 20 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened, and every smile disappeared. 20 minutes felt like 20 years. Nobody spoke. Nobody left. My father stood with his arms crossed, completely convinced he had won. Daniel poured himself another glass of champagne. Vanessa still held my BMW keys. Every few seconds, she'd glance through the window and smile at the car, as if it already belonged to her. I stood quietly with one hand resting on my stomach. The contractions hadn't started, but the tightness wouldn't go away. My mother finally walked over. "Audrey." I looked at her. She lowered her voice. "Please let it go." Those 4 words hurt more than anything my father had said. "Mom," I whispered, "that's my car." "I know." "Then why aren't you saying anything?" She looked toward my father, then back at me. "I don't want another family fight." I closed my eyes. There it was. The sentence I'd heard my entire life. Don't argue. Don't upset your father. Don't embarrass the family. Translation? Let Daniel have whatever he wants. Dad suddenly cleared his throat. "Everyone, let's continue celebrating." Music started again. People awkwardly clapped. Someone even proposed another toast. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My own family had watched my property being handed away, and within 2 minutes they were acting like nothing had happened. Then my phone buzzed. A text from my husband. Outside. I looked through the glass entrance. A black SUV had stopped in front of the banquet hall. Dad laughed. "So, he actually came." Daniel smirked. "What can he do?" Vanessa twirled the BMW keys around her finger. I'm not giving these back. I didn't answer. Because I knew my husband. He never argued when the law could speak for him. The front doors opened. My husband, Mason Carter, walked inside wearing the same navy suit he'd left for work that morning.
Calm.
Collected. Not angry. That was the first thing everyone noticed. He walked straight to me. Ignored my father. Ignored Daniel. Ignored everyone else. The first thing he asked wasn't about the car. He gently placed both hands on my shoulders. Are you okay? I nodded. Barely. He looked down at my stomach, then back into my eyes. Did anyone touch you?
No.
Did anyone threaten you?
No.
Only then did he turn around. The smile disappeared from his face. He looked directly at my father, then at the BMW keys in Vanessa's hand. Finally, he quietly asked one question. Who signed the transfer papers? My father's confident smile disappeared instantly, because for the first time all evening, nobody had actually answered that question. Nobody answered Mason. Not my father. Not Daniel. Not Vanessa. The ballroom had suddenly become very quiet. My father forced a laugh. What difference does that make? Mason didn't even look at him. He calmly repeated the question. Who signed the transfer papers? Dad shifted his weight. I handled everything. I didn't ask who handled it. Another silence. I asked who signed. Daniel finally spoke. Dad has always dealt with family paperwork. Mason nodded once. I figured. Then he looked at me. Audrey, did you sign anything?
No.
Did you authorize anyone to transfer your vehicle? Never. He smiled faintly. That's what I thought. My father folded his arms. The car was a gift. Mason turned toward him.
No.
It was marital property. I frowned. Marital property? Dad looked confused too.
What?
Mason reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a thin folder. I had a feeling something like this might happen one day. He handed the folder to my father. Read page 3. Dad glanced at it carelessly. Then his expression changed. What is this? Our financial records. The room leaned in. Mason looked completely calm. When Audrey and I got married, we signed a post-nuptial agreement. Dad frowned. So every asset Audrey brought into the marriage remained legally protected. He looked toward Vanessa. The BMW included. Vanessa's smile disappeared. Mason continued. The title can't legally be transferred without Audrey's notarized authorization. I watched my father's confidence begin to crack. But I have paperwork. Mason nodded. I'm sure you do. He paused. The question is whether it's genuine. The room froze. Daniel stepped forward. Are you accusing our father of forgery? I'm asking one simple question. Mason's voice never rose. Which notary witnessed Audrey's signature? Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. Dad certainly didn't. He stared at the floor, then at the folder, then back at Mason. My husband quietly pulled out his phone, tapped the screen once. Perfect. My stomach tightened. What? I've just confirmed something. He turned the phone toward me. On the screen was an email from the Department of Motor Vehicles. The subject line read, Urgent. Fraud alert. Titled Transfer Request. My father went completely pale. Because the transfer had never been completed. It had been automatically frozen. Less than 10 minutes earlier. For suspected signature fraud. Then Mason looked directly at my father and calmly said, Now I'd like to know who forged my wife's name. The ballroom erupted into stunned whispers. The ballroom erupted. Guests began whispering to each other. Several pulled out their phones. Others quietly stepped away from my father. Just minutes ago, he had looked untouchable. Now he looked trapped. My father snatched the folder from Mason. You're bluffing. Mason folded his arms. I wish I were. Dad flipped through the pages. His hands were shaking now. Not much. Just enough for me to notice. The DMV email wasn't fake. It clearly stated that Audrey's signature didn't match previous records and the title transfer had been flagged for manual review. The transfer was suspended. Vanessa stared at the BMW keys in her hand. What does this mean? Mason answered without looking at her. It means that car is still legally Audrey's. Daniel slammed his glass onto the table. This is ridiculous. No, Mason replied calmly. What's ridiculous is believing you could transfer someone else's vehicle without their permission.
Dad pointed at me.
She would have agreed eventually. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you forged my signature because you assumed I'd say yes later? He didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer. Only greed. Vanessa slowly placed the BMW keys on the table. I don't want the car. Dad immediately turned toward her. Take them. She shook her head.
No.
I said take them.
No.
For the first time all evening, someone had refused him. The room fell silent. Mason picked up the keys and placed them gently in my hand. They were always yours. I closed my fingers around them. The baby kicked again. This time softer. Almost as if my daughter knew we were finally winning. Then Mason looked back at my father. This ends today. Dad laughed bitterly. You can't prove I forged anything. Mason didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his jacket one more time. This time, he removed a sealed envelope. I wasn't planning to open this tonight. My stomach tightened. What is it? He looked at me. The investigator I hired 6 months ago sent it this morning. Dad's face drained of color. Investigator? Mason nodded. I started asking questions after your father kept insisting Audrey should transfer the BMW into Daniel's name. The room froze. 6 months ago? That meant this hadn't started at the engagement. It had started long before. Mason opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, bank records, and one signed statement. He looked directly at my father, then quietly said, You didn't just try to steal Audrey's BMW. He placed the statement on the table. You've been stealing from her for years. Mason laid the photographs across the table. Nobody touched them.
Nobody had to.
My father's expression told us they were real. Every single one. I picked up the first photograph. It showed my father standing outside a bank with Daniel. The date was 14 months earlier. The second showed them leaving the DMV together. The third made my stomach turn. It showed my father holding the spare key to my BMW. I had reported that key missing almost a year ago. Dad had looked me straight in the eyes and insisted he'd never seen it. He'd lied. The room fell silent. Mason opened the signed statement. I hired an investigator after Audrey told me the spare key disappeared. He looked at my father. At first I thought someone wanted to steal the car. He paused. I was wrong. He turned another page. They wanted ownership. Daniel looked confused. Dad, what's he talking about? My father didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Mason slid several bank statements across the table. Over the last 18 months, Richard repeatedly used Audrey's vehicle registration and insurance information when applying for personal loans. My heart skipped. What? The investigator's report was detailed. Every application listed my BMW as an available asset. Every application claimed my father had authority to use it. Every application had been rejected, until one lender approved it. I looked at Dad. You used my car as collateral? Silence. My mother covered her mouth. Daniel looked horrified. Even Vanessa stepped away from him. Then Mason quietly added, That wasn't the only asset. My blood ran cold. What else? He handed me another document. This one listed my savings account, the emergency fund I'd spent years building. My signature appeared again. Forged. Perfectly copied. I felt sick. You tried to access my savings? Dad finally spoke. His voice barely above a whisper. I was going to put it back. The room exploded. Daniel stared at him. You used Audrey's money? Dad looked at the floor. I didn't have a choice. You always had a choice, I said quietly. You just never expected to face consequences. Then Mason's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. Read the message. And slowly raised his eyes toward my father. The bank just called. Nobody moved. They've frozen every account connected to the investigation. My father's face turned completely white, because for the first time in years, he no longer had access to a single dollar. The room felt different now. Not because of the BMW. Nobody cared about the car anymore. This had become something much bigger. My father sat motionless, staring at the frozen bank account notification on Mason's phone. Daniel looked like he was seeing our father for the first time. "Dad." His voice shook. "Tell me this isn't true." Dad didn't answer. That silence was louder than any confession. My mother slowly sat down. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I trusted you." He still couldn't look at her. Mason quietly closed the investigation file. "I thought this ended with the BMW." He looked directly at my father. "I was wrong." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He reached into the folder again. "There was one document I didn't show everyone." The room became silent. He handed it to me. It was a loan agreement. Not in my father's name. Not in Daniel's.
Mine.
My heart stopped. "I never signed this." "I know." Mason pointed to the bottom of the page. Another forged signature. Another fake notary. But this loan wasn't for a car. It was for $200,000. Secured against my personal credit profile. I felt sick. "He tried to borrow money in my name?" Mason nodded. "The lender caught the inconsistencies before funding it." I looked at my father. "You were willing to ruin my life." He finally looked up. His eyes were full of regret. I was desperate.
No.
I shook my head. "You were selfish." The words hit him harder than shouting ever could. Then Daniel quietly stood. Everyone watched him. He walked toward me. Not toward Dad. Toward me. "I'm sorry." I stared at him. I swear I didn't know. For the first time all evening, I believed him. He looked at Vanessa, then gently took the BMW keys from my hand. He walked outside. A minute later, we heard the engine. Then he came back inside. He placed the keys back in my palm. I parked it where it belongs. Vanessa slipped off the engagement ribbon she'd tied around the mirrors. "I'm sorry too." I nodded. Neither of them had created this. They'd simply trusted the wrong man. Then the ballroom doors opened again. 2 detectives walked inside. One looked directly at my father. "Richard Sullivan?" Dad slowly stood. The detective held up a warrant. "We need to speak with you regarding multiple allegations of identity fraud." My father's shoulders dropped, because he finally understood. The investigation was only beginning. The detectives entered quietly. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. The warrant in the detective's hand spoke for itself. My father stood motionless. For the first time in my life, Richard Sullivan looked small. Very small. The lead detective stepped forward. "Mr. Sullivan, we'd like to ask you several questions regarding forged financial documents, attempted identity theft, and fraudulent title transfer applications." The room was silent. My father glanced at me, then at Daniel, then at my mother. He looked like he was searching for someone to rescue him. Nobody did. The detective continued. "We've already spoken with the Department of Motor Vehicles and 2 financial institutions." My stomach tightened. This was bigger than I realized. Far bigger. Dad slowly nodded. "I understand." The detective held out his hand. "We'll also need your phone." Dad hesitated. Just for a second. Then he handed it over. The detective immediately passed it to his partner. Within moments, the second detective frowned. "Sir." He turned the screen toward his partner. "I think you should see this." The lead detective walked over. His expression changed instantly. "What is it?" Mason asked. The detective looked directly at my father. "Who is Emily Ross?" The name meant nothing to me. Nothing to Daniel. Nothing to my mother. But it meant everything to my father. His face lost every bit of color. My mother frowned. "Who's Emily?" Dad lowered his head. Nobody answered. The detective looked back at the phone. "There are hundreds of messages." Silence. "Many discuss moving assets before your daughter became aware." My pulse quickened. "Assets? Plural?" The detective kept scrolling. Then quietly said, "It appears the BMW wasn't the primary target." The room froze. My father closed his eyes. Because suddenly everyone understood. The car had only been the beginning. The detective looked at me. "Mrs. Carter?" "Yes. We believe there are additional properties connected to your identity." My heart skipped. "I only own one property." The detective slowly shook his head. According to these messages. He looked back at the screen. Your father believed you owned 3. The room fell completely silent. Because if that was true, then tonight hadn't stopped a theft. It had interrupted a much bigger plan. The ballroom fell silent. I looked at the detective. There has to be some mistake. He shook his head. I wish there were.
He turned the phone toward me.
On the screen was a conversation between my father and someone saved as Emily Ross. The messages stretched back almost a year. One line caught my attention immediately. The daughter still doesn't know about the lake house or the commercial property. My heart stopped. Lake house? Commercial property? I looked at Mason. He looked just as confused. I don't own either of those. The detective nodded. Correct. Then he looked at me. But you are the beneficiary. My father slowly sat down. The fight had finally left him. The detective continued. Your late grandmother created a trust years before she passed away. I stared at him. My grandmother? He nodded. The trust included 3 properties. The BMW was never the goal. It was simply the easiest asset to test. Everything suddenly made sense. The missing key. The forged signatures. The fake title transfer. My father had been testing how easily he could move my assets without me noticing. If the BMW transfer had succeeded, he would have moved on to the properties. My mother began crying again. You were going to steal everything from your own daughter? Dad finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought she'd never need it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, you decided my brother deserved my future more than I did? He closed his eyes. I convinced myself it was for the family. No, I said quietly. You convinced yourself it was easier to betray me than disappoint Daniel. Daniel shook his head immediately. I never asked for any of this. For the first time all evening, I believed him. The detectives escorted my father toward the exit. Halfway to the door, he stopped. He turned back to look at me. I'm sorry. I held his gaze for several seconds, then calmly answered. I hope one day you understand something. He waited. You didn't lose your freedom because of a BMW. You lost it the moment you decided your daughter was something you could take from instead of someone you should protect. He lowered his head. Without another word, the detectives led him away. A year later, my daughter was born healthy. The BMW was still parked in my garage. Every family asset remained protected. And my brother spent the rest of his life trying to earn back something far more valuable than money.
My trust.